The blizzard had passed, but the cold still lingered like unfinished guilt. Outside a remote mountain cabin, an active-duty Navy SEAL knelt in the snow, breath slow, gloved hands trembling as he pressed them against the frozen ground. Before him lay a German shepherd, its body locked in ice, fur stiff beneath layers of frost, amber eyes barely open, still watching, still guarding something unseen. He had faced combat, chaos, and loss, but never this. A life slipping away, not to gunfire, but to silence and cold. Each breath he exhaled rose like a quiet prayer. Each heartbeat carried the weight of every teammate he couldn't bring home. When his hands touched the ice, he felt it. Faint warmth beneath the surface. Not hope. Not yet. But faith refusing to die. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell us in the comments. And stay with us. This story isn't finished yet. Winter pressed hard against the Cascade Mountains, Washington, wrapping the forest in silence, frost, and a sky the color of unspoken grief. Ethan Brooks had chosen this cabin precisely because no one came here in winter. The structure sat half-buried among fir trees, its roof bowed under snow, its windows rimmed with ice. Ethan himself cut a similar figure, 36 years old, lean and solid, shoulders squared by years of military discipline. His dark brown hair was cropped short, practical, threaded faintly with early gray at the temples. A close-trimmed beard framed a sharp jaw that rarely softened. His eyes, steel blue and alert even at rest, carried the quiet vigilance of a man who never truly stood down. Active-duty Navy SEAL, on temporary leave. The official reason was rest. The real reason was exhaustion, the kind that sleep never touched. Nights brought memories he couldn't silence. Days brought a restlessness he couldn't explain. Out here, the cold at least felt honest. That morning, fog crept low through the trees as Ethan stepped outside, boots crunching softly over fresh snow. The air burned his lungs. He welcomed it. Halfway down the slope, something broke the perfect white. A shape. Dark. Moving. Slowly. At first he thought it was a fallen branch dragged by wind. Then it lifted its head. A German shepherd emerged from the fog, large but gaunt, its black and tan coat dulled by ice and exhaustion. One foreleg dragged uselessly. Blood had frozen along the fur near its shoulder. Yet the dog did not whine, did not bark. It moved forward with deliberate effort, each step measured, disciplined. Its amber eyes locked onto Ethan, not pleading, not wild, focused, assessing. Ethan froze. That look hit him harder than the injury. He had seen it before, in Men Under Fire. This was not an animal wandering. This was a soldier advancing. Ethan dropped to one knee, hands open, voice low. "Easy," he said, not commanding, not soothing, just honest. The dog stopped a few feet away. Its breathing was shallow but controlled. Muscles trembled, yet its posture remained upright, alert. A canine collar circled its neck, worn leather-scarred and cracked. A name was etched into the metal, partially obscured by dried blood and ice. Ranger. The dog swayed, but refused to fall. Ethan's chest tightened. Training screamed through him. Check surroundings, assess threat. But instinct overruled protocol. He moved in, swift and careful, sliding an arm beneath the dog's chest. Ranger allowed it, trusted it. The weight was solid, heavier than it looked. This dog had been built for work, for endurance. As Ethan lifted him, Ranger exhaled once, a quiet sound that felt like permission. Inside the cabin, warmth crept slowly from the stove. Ethan laid Ranger near the fire, stripping off his own jacket to wrap the dog's torso. The wound was bad. Deep laceration, likely shrapnel or wire. Days old. Infection setting in. Ethan worked without hesitation, hands steady as muscle memory took over. He cleaned the wound, murmuring without realizing it, words he used to say to men bleeding out under desert suns. Ranger watched him the entire time. No growling, no flinching, just those eyes, tracking every movement. When Ethan paused, Ranger's ears twitched, not at sound, but at direction. Toward the forest, again. Always the same way. Even injured, even fading, Ranger's focus never shifted. Ethan felt a strange unease settle in his gut. Dogs ran from danger. This one had run toward something and hadn't finished. As the day wore on, fog lifted slightly, revealing the endless trees beyond the window. Ethan brewed coffee he didn't drink, sitting on the floor beside Ranger instead. He noticed how the dog slept, lightly, muscles tense, waking at every sound. Combat sleep, not rest. Ranger wasn't recovering. He was waiting. Ethan understood that kind of waiting intimately. It was the same one that haunted him at night, the one that came from unfinished missions and unanswered losses. He reached out, resting a hand against Ranger's broad chest. The heartbeat was strong, determined. "You weren't running," Ethan said quietly, more to himself than the dog. "You were coming." Ranger's eyes opened at that, just for a moment. They held each other's gaze, man and K9, both shaped by duty, both marked by survival. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying something faint through the trees, an echo of movement, or memory, or warning. Ethan didn't know yet that this meeting would pull him back into a fight he never truly left. He only knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no accident. And Ranger had found him for a reason. Night settled over the Cascade Mountains with a quiet heaviness, snow whispering against the cabin walls, while the forest held its breath. Ethan worked by firelight, his movements precise and economical, as if the years had never passed. The wound along Ranger's shoulder was worse than he'd first thought. Deep, torn, jagged at the edges. Old trauma. Not fresh, but not healed. Ethan cleaned it carefully, jaw set, eyes narrowed in focus. His hands never shook. They never had. Even when blood-soaked desert sand and radios screamed names that never answered back. Ranger lay still, massive chest rising shallowly beneath the blanket. His coat, black saddle over rich tan, was matted with ice and dried blood. But beneath it was a body built for endurance. 5, maybe 6 years old, prime working age for a K9. Ethan noted the discipline instantly. No snapping, no panic, only tension. The kind that lived under the skin of soldiers who slept with one eye open. When the antiseptic burned, Ranger exhaled sharply, but didn't move away. Trust given too quickly, or recognition. When the fire dimmed and the painkillers began to take hold, Ranger shifted, attempting to stand. His muscles trembled, paws slipping slightly on the cabin floor. Ethan steadied him with a firm hand to the chest. "Not yet," he murmured. Ranger ignored the words, but listened to the tone. He lowered himself reluctantly, eyes never leaving the door. Every sound outside drew his attention. The creak of trees, distant wind curling through the valley. Ethan followed the dog's gaze more than once, hand resting unconsciously near where a weapon used to be. Ranger wasn't afraid. He was alert. Waiting. That unsettled Ethan more than fear would have. Animals sought safety when wounded. This one sought readiness. Ethan felt a quiet pull in his chest, a familiar ache. He had known men like this. Men who kept watch even when they should have been resting, because something out there wasn't finished. Sleep didn't come easily. It never did. Ethan sat in the chair near the stove, coffee cooling untouched in his mug. His reflection stared back at him in the dark window. Angular face, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, scars faint but present if you knew where to look. Afghanistan had taken something from him. Not his courage, not his discipline. Something quieter. A teammate named Mark Delaney, broad-shouldered, quick to laugh, gone in a flash of heat and dust while Ethan lived. That was the moment things changed. That was when rest became impossible. Ranger stirred, whining softly in his sleep. His paws twitched as if running. Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Easy," he said again, voice rough. Ranger's breathing slowed at the sound. The realization hit him slowly. Unwelcome, but undeniable. The dog responded to him the way his team once had. Not because of rank, because of presence. Near dawn, Ethan stepped outside to check the perimeter. Ranger struggled to follow, ignoring pain, forcing himself upright. Ethan didn't stop him this time. He watched the dog move, limping but controlled, always scanning the tree line. That was when Ethan saw it clearly. The way Ranger positioned himself between Ethan and the forest, the way his ears angled toward a single direction, repeatedly, insistently. Ethan followed the line of sight. Nothing obvious. Just trees, shadow, distance. "You're guarding something," Ethan said quietly. Ranger glanced up at him, amber eyes sharp despite exhaustion. No wagging tail, no reassurance, just confirmation. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settle fully onto his shoulders. He hadn't planned on this. He hadn't wanted this. But it was here. And once again, something broken had found him. By mid-morning, Ranger allowed himself to eat, slowly, deliberately. No hunger-driven frenzy. He paused between mouthfuls, watching Ethan, reading him. Ethan noticed the way Ranger flinched at the faint sound of an engine far off, beyond the ridge. Barely audible. Ethan hadn't heard it at first. Ranger had. Combat conditioning. The kind no one ever fully trained out of you. "You didn't come here by accident," Ethan said, crouching near him. Ranger's tail thumped once, weak but intentional. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Ethan exhaled through his nose. He hadn't realized how much he missed that, being understood without explanation. As the fog lifted, Ethan checked Ranger's collar again. The metal tag was worn thin, scratched by time and impact. Ranger. No unit marking. No contact number. Someone had wanted the dog to be untraceable. That tightened Ethan's jaw. He remembered classified missions, erased files, men who officially never existed. Ranger belonged to that world. And now that world had left him behind. Ethan felt something harden inside his chest. Not anger, not fear. Resolve. He packed medical supplies into a small bag, his movements already shifting from recovery to readiness. Ranger watched him, alert despite the pain. "You're not done," Ethan said. "Neither am I." When Ethan finally lay down on the cot, exhaustion claimed him in fragments. He dreamed of running through snow that turned to sand, of a shape beside him that never fell behind. When he woke, Ranger was awake too, sitting upright despite the strain, staring toward the forest as if listening for a call only he could hear. Ethan sat up slowly, meeting the dog's gaze. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding forged not by words, but by shared scars. This was no longer a rescue. It was a partnership, whether Ethan wanted it or not. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying with it the faint promise of movement, of answers waiting beyond the trees. Morning broke cold and pale, the fog retreating into the trees as frost clung stubbornly to every branch in the Cascade Forest. Ranger was on his feet before Ethan fully woke. The dog's posture had changed overnight. Less guarded, more intentional. His injured shoulder still limited his movement, but it no longer slowed his focus. He paced near the cabin door, stopping only to look back at Ethan, ears angled forward, tail steady and low. Not anxious. Directed. Ethan recognized the shift immediately. This wasn't restlessness, this was orientation. He pulled on his boots, muscles stiff but responsive, and followed Ranger outside. Snow crunched underfoot as Ranger moved ahead, never rushing, never hesitating, always glancing back to ensure Ethan kept pace. The dog did not sniff randomly or wander. He followed a precise line through the trees, one he seemed to have memorized under far worse conditions. Ethan felt a familiar tightening in his chest. This was how patrols moved. This was how men advanced when the terrain mattered and mistakes cost lives. They reached a narrow slope where the forest thinned. Ranger stopped abruptly, hackles lifting. Ethan crouched, scanning the ground. That was when he saw them. Partial impressions pressed deep into the snow, heavier than hiking boots, unevenly spaced, partially collapsed by time and wind. Military tread. Not recent, but not old either. Someone had passed through here with weight on their back. Ranger lowered his head, tracking the trail with quiet intensity, pausing only when the scent faded beneath ice. Ethan followed slowly, his breathing controlled, his awareness expanding outward. Every snapped twig felt too loud. Every shadow carried possibility. Ranger wasn't nervous. He was careful. That distinction mattered. The trail led toward a cluster of rocks where the ground dipped sharply, forming a shallow ravine partially concealed by snow-laden brush. Ranger stopped at the ravine's edge and let out a low sound. Barely a growl, barely a warning. Ethan eased forward, spotting something unnatural among the white. Fabric, dark green, half buried. He descended carefully, knees bending as he brushed away snow with gloved hands. A military-grade backpack lay wedged between stones, its straps torn, its surface scarred. The material was stiff with frozen moisture, but intact. Ethan reached for it instinctively, and froze. Ranger stepped forward immediately, placing his body between Ethan and the bag. His stance was rigid, eyes locked on the object, muscles coiled. Not aggression, protection. Ethan raised his hands slowly, heart pounding. "All right," he said softly. "I hear you." Ranger did not relax. Whatever this was, it mattered. Ethan shifted his approach, scanning the area first, checking for wires, disturbances, signs of a trap. Nothing obvious. Still, Ranger remained planted, as if guarding a fallen comrade. Only after Ethan carefully circled the bag and knelt at a distance did Ranger allow him closer. Inside, the contents told a story that tightened Ethan's jaw. A shattered radio unit, a GPS device cracked along the edge, laminated maps marked with hand-drawn symbols and coordinates, and beneath them, a rugged external drive sealed in plastic, scratched, but intact. Ethan exhaled slowly. This wasn't lost gear. This was abandoned under pressure. Ranger watched every movement, eyes flicking between Ethan's hands and the surrounding trees. When a gust of wind rattled branches above, Ranger stiffened instantly, placing himself half a step in front of Ethan. Ethan felt the weight of realization settle fully. Ranger hadn't come seeking shelter. He had come seeking continuity. The dog wasn't surviving by instinct alone. He was executing his last directive, protect the objective until relieved. They returned to the cabin with the pack secured. Ranger walked beside Ethan now, not ahead. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Ethan spread the contents across the table, examining each item with the precision drilled into him by years of classified operations. No identifying unit markings. Serial numbers filed down. Whoever owned this gear wasn't meant to exist on paper. Ethan rubbed a hand over his beard, eyes narrowing. He thought of missions scrubbed from records, men who never came home, families who never received answers. Ranger lay near the table, watching intently, ears twitching at the faintest noise outside. The dog's breathing was calm but ready. Ethan understood that posture intimately. Ranger was not done watching. He was waiting for the next phase. As the day wore on, Ethan tried to access the drive, only to find it encrypted. Multiple layers. Professional. He shut the laptop with a quiet click, leaning back in his chair. His reflection stared back at him in the dark screen. Older than he felt, sharper than he wanted to be. He glanced at Ranger. "You chose right," he said quietly. Ranger's tail moved once, restrained but deliberate. It wasn't affirmation. It was acknowledgement. Ethan felt something shift inside him, something aligning after years of quiet drift. This wasn't about answers anymore. It was about responsibility. By dusk, the forest grew restless. Ranger's attention sharpened, his ears angling toward distant sounds Ethan barely registered. The dog rose slowly, moving to the window, scanning the tree line. Ethan followed his gaze, pulse quickening. Nothing visible. Yet Ranger remained fixed, muscles tight, nostrils flaring. Ethan trusted that instinct more than his own eyes. He packed the gear away carefully, securing the drive deep in his bag. He didn't know who had sent Ranger or what had happened to the rest of the team. But he knew this much with absolute certainty. Ranger had not failed. He had endured. And now, by some quiet alignment of fate and training, he had found the one person capable of carrying the mission forward. Outside, the wind shifted again, and somewhere beyond the trees, something unseen began to move. Rain replaced snow by nightfall, tapping softly against the cabin roof as the forest darkened into a restless, listening presence. Ethan hadn't planned on reaching out to anyone. Isolation had been his shield for years. But the encrypted drive on the table and the dog watching the tree line like a sentry made silence feel irresponsible. He powered up the satellite phone he rarely used, fingers hesitating only once before dialing. Laura Mitchell answered on the third ring. Her voice was steady, alert, the kind that never truly slept. Laura was in her early 30s, tall and slim, with auburn hair usually pulled back in a no-nonsense knot. Her pale skin carried faint freckles earned from years in the field, not behind a desk. She had sharp green eyes that missed nothing and a habit of listening longer than she spoke. "You don't call unless something's wrong," she said calmly. Ethan exhaled. "I found something that doesn't want to stay buried." Silence followed. Not confusion, but recognition. Laura arrived before dawn, driving a mud-splattered SUV that had seen more back roads than highways. She stepped out wearing a dark wool coat and worn boots, moving with quiet purpose despite the cold. When she met Ranger, she froze, not in fear, but in awe. The German Shepherd studied her intently, amber eyes measuring intent. Laura crouched slowly, palms open. "He's not a stray," she said softly. "He's working." Her voice carried respect, not curiosity. Inside the cabin, Ethan laid out the contents of the pack. Laura examined each item with methodical focus, her jaw tightening with every detail. "This matches my file," she finally said. "A private security contractor operating under multiple shell names, off-the-books extractions, weapons moving through protected forest corridors." When she glanced at Ranger, "A mixed team disappeared 6 weeks ago. No report, no recovery. Someone erased them." As Laura spoke, Ethan watched Ranger. The dog reacted to specific words: security, forest, extraction, with subtle shifts in posture, ears angled, muscles tightened, memory responding. Laura noticed too. "He remembers," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. He led me to their gear. Laura's expression hardened. Then he's not just a survivor. He's evidence. She explained how the contractor used national forest land as cover, exploiting blind zones where oversight was thin. The missing team had likely discovered something they weren't meant to. Ranger, injured but relentless, had broken away under fire, not fleeing, escaping with purpose. Most K9s are trained to hold position, Laura said. Leaving means the handler ordered it, or couldn't. The implication hung heavy. Ethan felt the familiar burn of guilt rise, uninvited. He pushed it down. They attempted to access the drive together. Laura's fingers flew over the keyboard, movements quick, practiced. She failed twice, then paused. Military-grade encryption, she said. Whoever did this knew you'd try. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his eyes. Then why let the dog live? Laura looked at Ranger again. Because killing a K9 leaves a trail. Letting him disappear into the wilderness looks like nature. Ranger shifted, resting his head briefly against Ethan's knee. The contact grounded him. He wasn't supposed to make it, Laura continued, but he did, and that changes everything. Outside, thunder rolled distantly, as echoing off the mountains like restrained anger. As the storm intensified, Laura shared what she hadn't published. Threats, warnings disguised as concern, a source who went silent after mentioning internal cleanup. She had learned to survive by staying one step ahead and trusting her instincts. This is bigger than illegal arms, she said. It's land, water, roots. Long-term. Ethan listened, recognizing the pattern. Power didn't erase problems. It buried them. Ranger suddenly stood, moving to the window, a low sound vibrating in his chest. Laura followed his gaze. Someone nearby? Ethan asked. Ranger didn't growl. He watched. That was worse. Ethan shut the blinds carefully. He reacts before things happen, Laura whispered, like he's learned to anticipate. By late night, they agreed on one thing. The story couldn't break yet. Not without protection. Not without proof strong enough to survive retaliation. Laura packed her laptop, but left a burner phone behind. If anything changes, she said, meeting Ethan's eyes, you call me first. No heroes. Ethan gave a faint smile. Too late. Laura glanced at Ranger once more before leaving. He's not done, she said. Neither are you. Her headlights vanished into the rain, leaving the cabin darker than before, but sharper too. Ethan sat with Ranger long after, the drive secured, the truth heavier now that it had a shape. Ranger lay at his feet, vigilant even in rest. Ethan finally understood the full weight of what had arrived at his door. This wasn't a rescue. It was a handoff. Ranger hadn't failed his team. He had delivered their last chance. Outside, the storm eased, rain tapering to a whisper. Somewhere in the forest, something waited. And for the first time in years, Ethan didn't turn away from what was coming. A blizzard swept through the Cascade foothills, wind tearing at the trees and frosting the cabin windows in jagged patterns. Ethan was asleep on the cot near the wood stove, the storm masking every sound outside. Ranger lay at the foot of the bed, ears twitching. Something in the dog's posture made Ethan stir awake, alert, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the small window. He had learned to trust these instincts over years of deployment. Ranger was not merely sensing danger. He was analyzing, predicting. Ethan's heart rate quickened, but he stayed still, letting the dog guide him. Shadows outside shifted in ways that felt unnatural, and the faint crunch of boots against snow reached Ethan's ears only through Ranger's taut gaze. A deep growl rumbled from the dog, low and controlled, warning without revealing the source. Outside, a black SUV had parked just beyond the tree line, obscured by blowing snow. Two figures moved with practiced caution, their movements deliberate. The taller of the two, identified later as Gideon Cross, had a square jaw, a dark stubble across sun-weathered skin, and eyes like steel, calm, calculating, with a history of survival that had hardened him. His companion, a younger man with sharp features and a scar slicing across his left cheek, had the restless energy of someone untested, yet dangerous. Both were hired enforcers, familiar with military tactics. They didn't know that the cabin wasn't defenseless, and that the quiet soldier inside had a four-legged sentinel who could anticipate every step. Ranger slipped silently out the door, pads nearly soundless on the frozen deck. Ethan grabbed his coat, knowing the dog would not leave him exposed. The wind tore at their clothing as they circled the cabin. Ranger positioned himself strategically, flank guarded, body low but poised to strike. Each step he took was precise, measured. Ethan followed the dog's cues, his senses stretched taut, remembering every patrol, every ambush, every instance where failure meant loss. A K9 trained in urban environments adapted to wilderness threats, Ranger became an extension of Ethan's combat intuition. The intruders paused, scanning for signs of life. Gideon crouched behind a snow-covered boulder, signaling the younger man. Ethan's pulse thumped as he watched Ranger appear briefly from the shadows, drawing attention away from the cabin door. The dog barked sharply, not in alarm, but in command of territory. Snow sprayed from his paws as he sprinted, disappearing behind a drift and re-emerging in the intruder's peripheral vision. Panic flashed briefly in their eyes. They had expected silence, not tactical distraction. Ethan realized then the depth of trust forming between him and the dog. Ranger wasn't just protecting him physically, he was orchestrating the defense. A flurry of shots rang out, ricocheting into the trees. Ranger lunged between Ethan and the nearest threat, teeth bared, but careful not to engage directly. His strategy was to slow, confuse, and control. Ethan grabbed the first intruder's arm when the man approached a window, twisting him to the side, guided by Ranger's positioning. The younger man tried to flank, but Ranger anticipated, spinning to intercept. The K9's intelligence showed in the smallest details: paw placement, eye contact, tension in muscles. Every maneuver was calculated. Ethan felt a rare warmth of relief. He wasn't alone in facing this threat. Ranger's presence altered the dynamic completely. As the night wore on, the intruders retreated to reassess, realizing the cabin was too fortified for a direct approach. Gideon's calm exterior cracked only slightly, frustration showing in clenched fists and muttered orders. Ethan stood at the window, watching snow swirl around the disappearing silhouettes, heart still pounding, but steadier than before. Ranger returned to his post at the cabin door, alert but no longer on attack. His amber eyes met Ethan's, conveying understanding, warning, and reassurance all at once. Ethan ran a hand over the dog's head, whispering, "You're not just a partner. You're my shield." The storm began to ease by early morning, leaving behind a quiet, snow-laden landscape. Ethan and Ranger patrolled the perimeter, checking traps and points of entry. He reflected on the night's events. For the first time in years, he had experienced the feeling of being saved, rather than being the savior. Ranger, injured but resilient, had assumed the role of protector instinctively. It was more than obedience. It was judgment, strategy, and a deep bond forged in shared vigilance. Ethan's thoughts turned inward. He realized that trust could be extended beyond fellow humans, and that survival often required accepting help, sometimes from unexpected allies. By noon, Ethan had reinforced the cabin's defenses and prepared contingency plans. Ranger rested nearby, tail flicking occasionally, eyes scanning the forest. Ethan pored over maps, considering extraction routes and points of vulnerability, aware now that the threats would not easily disappear. Yet a calm determination settled over him. They had survived. They had adapted. And through Ranger's guidance, Ethan recognized a new level of unity. Soldier and K9, human and animal, operating as one to face whatever lay beyond the snowy ridge. Morning arrived sharp and clear, the storm finally broken, sunlight cutting through the cascade forest like a blade of truth. Ethan stood outside the cabin as the first federal vehicles climbed the narrow mountain road. Gravel crunched under heavy tires. Ranger remained at his side, posture calm but alert. Head high, eyes tracking every movement. Ethan had spent the night relaying coordinates and encrypted files to Laura, trusting her instincts more than official channels. Now the moment had come. 2 black SUVs stopped near the tree line, followed by a white command truck. Agents emerged in layers of tactical gear, movements efficient but restrained. Leading them was Special Agent Daniel Reed, a man in his early 40s with a square, weathered face, close-cropped hair, and a trimmed beard that barely hid a scar along his jawline. Reed carried himself like someone who had learned patience the hard way. Measured, observant, unreactive. His eyes lingered on Ranger longer than the others. "That dog's the reason we're here," he said quietly. Ethan nodded. "He's the reason this ends." Inside the cabin, Laura Mitchell stood near the table, posture straight despite clear exhaustion. Her auburn hair was pulled back tightly, dark circles under sharp green eyes betraying a sleepless night. Yet her voice was steady as she walked Reed through the evidence: maps, timestamps, recovered transmission logs, and the encrypted drive Ranger had guarded with his life. As Reed's team worked to crack the final layers, Laura glanced at Ranger again. "Most witnesses talk," she murmured. "This one survived." Ranger lay down near Ethan's boots, ears angled toward the room, absorbing every tone. Ethan felt a strange mix of pride and weight. Ranger wasn't just present. He was testifying without words. By midday, confirmation came through. The encryption broke. The files exposed a private arms pipeline moving through protected forest land, masked as environmental security operations. Video footage showed familiar faces, men Ethan recognized from briefings, now caught on the wrong side of history. More damning still were mission logs tied to the missing team. The truth was undeniable. They had been silenced after discovering the operation's scale. Ranger's handler was among them. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, jaw tightening. He had lost friends before. But this loss carried a sharper edge. These men hadn't fallen in combat. They had been erased. Ranger stood suddenly, placing his paw against Ethan's leg, grounding him. Ethan breathed again. This time someone was listening. Reed's voice cut through the room. "We have enough for arrests." The words landed with quiet finality. Within hours, coordinated raids unfolded across multiple sites. Weapons caches were seized, accounts frozen, contractors detained. Ethan watched updates stream across Laura's laptop, the scope widening with every confirmation. Ranger tracked the room's energy, rising only when voices sharpened. When Reed knelt briefly to examine Ranger's collar, his tone softened. "This dog saved lives," he said. "Even now." Ranger met his gaze calmly, unflinching. Recognition passed between soldier and K9. Ethan felt something inside him ease, a tension he hadn't realized he'd carried since Afghanistan. That afternoon, a formal identification arrived. The missing team's records were reinstated, names restored, families notified. Ranger's handler was no longer a ghost. Ethan stepped outside when the call ended, cold air filling his lungs. He remembered standing over a flag-draped coffin years ago, wondering why survival sometimes felt like failure. Now, watching agents move with purpose and hearing Ranger's steady breathing behind him, Ethan understood something he hadn't before. Justice didn't erase loss, but it honored it. Ranger wasn't just the key to an investigation, he was the reason the dead were remembered correctly. As dusk approached, Reed returned with paperwork and a small case. Inside lay a service patch and a formal citation. "Pending full review," Reed said. "This K9 is being recognized for extraordinary service." Laura smiled faintly, exhaustion giving way to relief. Ethan crouched beside Ranger, resting his forehead briefly against the dog's. "You did it," he whispered. Ranger's tail moved once, slow and controlled. No celebration, just completion. Ethan felt the familiar ache in his chest shift, not disappear, but settle into something usable. This mission wasn't about redemption in the abstract. It was about standing up when it mattered. As the agents prepared to leave, Laura lingered. "This story will break," she said softly. "But not tonight." Ethan nodded. Some things deserve to breathe first. Ranger sat between them, calm, grounded, whole despite the scars. The forest grew quiet again as engines faded down the road. For the first time since Ranger had arrived at the cabin, silence didn't feel dangerous. It felt earned. Ethan looked toward the tree line where it had all begun, and understood the truth fully now. Ranger hadn't come to be saved. He had come to finish something. And together, they had. Spring arrived quietly, softening the last veins of snow across the valley, as sunlight returned to the land with patient grace. The training and recovery center stood where an abandoned ranger outpost once crumbled, rebuilt with clean lines, wide windows, and open fields that breathed again. Ethan Brooks walked its perimeter in the early morning, boots tracing paths that no longer felt defensive. He looked different now, still lean, still sharp at the edges, beard trimmed close, eyes alert. But the weight behind his gaze had shifted. It wasn't gone. It was placed. Ranger moved beside him, shoulder healed into a thick scar beneath a gleaming black and tan coat, muscles strong, stride fluid. He was 5, nearly 6, an age that carried wisdom in K9 years. Ranger scanned the grounds with quiet confidence, not guarding, not hunting, learning. Ethan felt the difference in himself, too. For the first time since Afghanistan, he wasn't waiting for the next threat. He was building something meant to last. Inside the main building, Dr. Sarah Collins greeted them with a small, genuine smile. Sarah was in her mid-30s, tall and slender, with warm brown skin and dark hair worn loose at her shoulders, usually tucked behind one ear when she listened. Her eyes held a steadiness earned through years of working with trauma, both human and canine. She spoke softly, but with certainty. "Ranger's assessment looks excellent," she said, kneeling to offer her hand. Ranger approached, sniffed once, then sat, calm, attentive, trusting. Sarah nodded, impressed. "He chooses connection," she said to Ethan. "That tells me he's ready." Ethan watched the exchange with a quiet pride that surprised him. He had learned to trust Sarah quickly. She didn't rush healing. She respected it. That mattered. The center filled gradually, veterans with careful smiles, handlers learning to breathe again, dogs rediscovering grass beneath their paws. Ethan began his new role not as a commander, but as a guide. He trained teams in movement, trust, and patience, sharing what Ranger had taught him without lectures. Ranger worked alongside him, demonstrating calm engagement, precise obedience, and, most importantly, restraint. Ethan saw reflections of his past in the men who watched, the stiffness, the guarded humor, the eyes that scanned exits first. He also saw hope. Ranger had become a bridge, a living example that service did not end in abandonment, that survival could be shared. At night, Ethan slept without jolting awake, the dog's steady breathing anchoring him to the present. On the first warm afternoon, The snow finally released the field behind the center. Ranger ran, full stride, unburdened, chasing nothing at all. Ethan stood at the fence, hands resting lightly on the rail, heart quiet. When Ranger reached the far edge, he stopped and turned back. For a moment, time seemed to hold. The dog's amber eyes met Ethan's with something new. Peace, yes, but also certainty. Not the vigilance of a mission, the contentment of arrival. Ranger trotted back, tail relaxed, and sat at Ethan's side without command. Ethan crouched, resting his forehead briefly against Ranger's. "We made it," he whispered. He felt the truth of it settled deep. Weeks later, a small ceremony gathered the center's staff and families. No speeches stretched too long. No applause overwhelmed the moment. Sarah stood near the front, hands folded, watching as Ethan received his new assignment, officially paired with Ranger as handler and trainer. Not owner. Partner. The language mattered. When Ranger's citation was read, Ethan felt a tightness in his chest that was not grief. It was gratitude. The names of the fallen team were honored quietly, restored to records and memory. Ranger sat through it all, composed, head high. He did not look back toward the forest anymore. He looked forward. As dusk settled, lanterns were lit along the walkway, their glow reflected in the windows like small promises kept. Ethan walked with Ranger through the field one last time before night. The air carried the scent of thawed earth and pine. He thought of the night Ranger arrived, broken, driven, unyielding, and of the man he had been then. The war had not ended for Ethan when he came home. It ended here, not in forgetting, but in choosing to stay. Ranger paused, then leaned lightly into Ethan's leg, a simple weight, perfectly placed. Ethan smiled, feeling whole in a way that did not erase scars, but honored them. Some miracles do not pull us from the fire. They teach us how to live after. Together they walked back toward the light. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder or fire. Sometimes God sends them quietly, through loyalty, through endurance, through a companion who refuses to leave you behind. Ranger wasn't just a K9. He was a reminder that even in our darkest seasons, God is still guiding us forward. In everyday life, when you feel tired, unseen, or broken, remember this: you are not forgotten. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and subscribe for more stories of faith. May God bless you and protect your path.